A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you for tuning into another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad to be with you today. Coming up in just a matter of minutes, Peter Roff is going to join us, contributing editor at Newsweek, has a new column out talking about ways that technology and not gun control can actually improve public safety and cut down on the active assailant attacks in this country. We've got some other headlines to get to. I just got to take a moment, though, before we get started here to show off my really cool new t-shirt. You see, it says, enjoy the perks of adulthood. And then underneath there, you got a little rocks glass, you got a little fire, you got a little pipe. This was a courtesy of the good folks at the Independence Institute out in Colorado. I was the keynote speaker for the ATF party out in Colorado this past weekend. A fantastic event. If you are a Coloradan, you got to make plans to go next year. Sporting clays in the morning, and it's all held at the beautiful Kiowa Creek Sporting Club outside of Denver, probably 20, 30 minutes outside of the, maybe 45 minutes outside of like the downtown Denver area, over on the east side. So it's, nice and flat, kind of maybe gentle rolling hills, just an absolutely beautiful setting. Sporting clays in the morning. Then you gather for some libations, some great barbecue, cigars, and it was just a really, really great event. So I appreciate the invite. I think this is my third time attending an ATF party, and any time I get the opportunity to do so, I'm there. It's a great group of folks. They're doing great work, and again, you get a really cool t-shirt as well, so what's not to like? All right, let's get to today's headline, shall we? We'll start with Talking Points Memo over on the left, saying that Pat Toomey is projecting optimism on gun control legislation, specifically the Manchin-Toomey bill that is sort of universal background check light. The Manchin-Toomey bill would apply or require that background checks be performed for all commercial sales of firearms, including those that originate at gun shows or on the internet. I think that's the way that they describe it. So, in other words, the only thing that makes this not a quote-unquote universal background check bill is that it does not apply to transfers between friends or family members. I've been told, in fact, I think Senator Manchin said a few years ago that, look, if you're just like posting something up on your bulletin board at work, hey, I got the shotgun for sale, or you want to post something on your church bulletin board, that Manchin-Toomey would not apply to those types of transactions. But to me, that's a commercial sale, so I don't know why it wouldn't. All commercial sales of firearms, if you're talking about federally licensed firearms retailers, already every one of those sales, regardless of where it takes place, the buyer has to go through a background check. When we talk about expanding background checks, not in terms of expanding the records that go into the NICS system, but expanding actually, okay, who has to go through a background check? All retail sales, all commercial sales, all sales by federally licensed firearm retailers are already covered. So now what we're talking about are private transfers between two individuals who are not gun dealers, who are, one of them is a gun owner and one of them wants to sell their firearm to somebody else. That's when the expansion of these background checks come into play. And Manchin-Toomey is definitely a quote-unquote expansion of the background check system. And again, it's really, really hard to figure out how on earth background checks would be enforced on these private sales, and how on earth this could ever be done in a proactive fashion as opposed to retroactively. But Pat Toomey telling Politico, quote, fundamentally, it's a difficult task. He says, that being said, the chances are looking better than they have ever looked at any time, certainly since Senator Manchin and I first pushed for Manchin-Toomey back in 2013. As Talking Points Memo describes it, the legislation would expand background checks to all commercial purchases and close the gun show loophole. Again, there is no gun show loophole. And part of the reason why this is so frustrating for gun owners is because we keep hearing people talk about what these laws would do, and it doesn't make any damn sense. Because we already know what the law is. The existing federal law says if you are a federally licensed firearms retailer, you have to make your buyer go through a background check for every sale, regardless of whether or not you're at a gun show in your brick and mortar store, or if somebody, contacts you online and says, hey, I saw that gun that you had advertised for sale, they're still going to have to go through their FFL if you're going to transfer that firearm out of state, for instance. So we need to be specific about what it is we're actually talking about here. And part of the problem is gun control advocates really don't want to be all that specific when we're talking about these particular gun control laws. They like to keep it vague. When you start getting specific, all of a sudden, support for things like quote-unquote universal background checks drop dramatically. Right now, in fact, I think it was last week, we talked about a poll in Ohio showing 90% of Ohioans want background checks for every gun sale, but only like 48% of Ohioans wanted stricter gun control laws. That's a big difference, considering that, requiring background checks for every firearm transfer would be a more restrictive gun control law. When most people think background checks, they're thinking about the existing system as it works right now, right? Where you go to a gun store, you go through a background check, you get a gun. Gun control groups are happy to have the general voting public think that that's what they're talking about, because again, it bumps up their support. But when Americans actually get a chance to vote on these quote unquote universal background checks, the numbers look a lot different. Back in 2016, a quote unquote universal background check referendum passed by less than 1% margin of victory in Nevada. In Maine, it was defeated by 4 points. I think the highest level of support that a quote-unquote universal background check measure has enjoyed, Washington State a few years ago, I think it passed with not quite 70%. I think it was like 67% approval. And by the way, in Washington State since then, background checks haven't gone up. They haven't gone up. They haven't increased because, again, it's really, really hard, if not impossible, to try to enforce these laws. Got a new policy in place, not a new law, but a new policy in place with the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, announcing that it is now banning guns in all of its churches unless you are a law enforcement officer. There is an exception for you. You can still carry while you are worshiping, but everybody else has been told, no, you have to leave your guns at home. This apparently was first reported to local meeting houses and houses of worship there in Texas after a new law went into effect, specifically stating that, yes, concealed carry holders can carry in synagogues and in churches and in mosques and in other houses of worship, unless they are specifically prohibited by the institution from doing so. And so the Mormon Church is stepping in and saying, okay, well, yeah, we're explicitly prohibiting you from doing so. According to the letter that was sent out to Texas churches and will be going out around the country as well, if a priest were to see somebody who is carrying inside the church, they are to kindly ask them to leave. Which is probably fine if somebody doesn't have evil intent in their heart, but if somebody who does have evil intent in their heart walks into that church with a gun, and there is no law enforcement officer who's actually in attendance, right? You're going to be looking at a really big problem. A lot of churches, and listen, churches have the right to set their policies, whatever policy they want to decide, that's up to them. I think it's worth noting that a lot of churches and a lot of synagogues around the country have taken a different step, and they now have armed church security teams. They welcome armed parishioners because they know that these sanctuaries, unfortunately, are sometimes targets for those twisted individuals with evil intentions. And in order to protect the flock, there needs to be the ability to respond to an attack. And I guess we're not going to be seeing that in the Mormon churches anytime soon. Tomorrow, we will be seeing Massachusetts Legislative Committee consider several gun control bills, some really bad gun control bills as well. And we're going to hopefully have the opportunity to talk with our friend Jim Wallace from the Gun Owners Action League about this on the program in the next couple of days. But it's a Massachusetts, so it's not the final end-all be-all vote here, but the Joint Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security is set to hear dozens of gun control bills when it meets tomorrow, including, according to the New England Public Radio Network, Proposals to regulate the 3D printing of firearms, regulate, more like ban, and require reporting on where firearms are used during crimes where they were purchased. Gun rationing, so a limit of one firearm a month. There are more restrictions on magazine capacities coming. And Jim Wallace of the Gun Owners Action League says, listen, the vast majority, 99.99% of legal gun owners are not committing crimes. We're not dealing with the criminal element. So why are we telling everybody that we need to limit you because of the actions of criminals? Now, there are some pro-Second Amendment bills that will be heard tomorrow, including one that would actually establish firearms preemption law in Massachusetts. It would forbid cities and towns from passing gun control laws that are more restrictive than those that are already passed at the state level. I don't expect that that's going to have much success. As a matter of fact, gun control advocates right now are in a full court press around the country to try to remove firearms preemption laws from the books. I actually wrote about this for Bearing Arms yesterday. We've seen in terms of Florida, there were Democrats that were calling for a special session. One of the things that they wanted to do was get rid of Florida's preemption law. In Virginia, we've seen bills already introduced that would get rid of our state's preemption law. Pennsylvania, you've got the city of Pittsburgh that instituted local gun control ordinances in violation of state preemption law in order to get sued so they could now try to take on firearms preemption in court. This is a nationwide campaign by gun control groups, and it doesn't really feel like it's a nationwide campaign because it's playing out at the local level, right? In states around the country, we're seeing these efforts to remove firearms preemption laws from the books, but there's no nationwide branding campaign. But it is a nationwide effort. Why? Because gun control groups hate firearms preemption laws. They want as many different localities to pass as many different gun control laws as they possibly can. One, they're going to have more restrictive gun control laws in place if cities are able to do that. Two, it makes it more legally dangerous to be a law-abiding gun owner because you now have to know what the laws of every municipality might be as you're driving through, or else you risk becoming a criminal. And see, it's easier to keep these gun control laws on the books because if you have, let's say, state of Pennsylvania, if you've got a state with firearms preemption law like Pennsylvania, and let's say Pennsylvania passes a gun control law. Well, gun rights advocates or Second Amendment advocates, they can then sue the state. That's one lawsuit. If you get rid of firearms preemption, all right, now you're probably going to have to deal with suing Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Allentown, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton. All of a sudden now you're looking at dozens of municipalities passing variations of gun control laws. In order to challenge those laws, you're going to have to take each and every one of those municipalities to court, which gets expensive. Gun control advocates, they're offering their legal services pro bono to these cities. So it's not going to cost the city a dime, but it is going to cost gun owners who want to challenge these laws, and it's going to be a very, very pricey endeavor to try to protect your rights. So that's one of the reasons why we are seeing this attack on preemption. Again, just a part and parcel of the broader efforts to restrict our Second Amendment rights in the name of public safety, right? Peter Roff, who's a contributing editor at Newsweek, has a new piece where he talks about using technology instead of gun control to actually and effectively be able to try to stop and mitigate these active assailant attacks. I talked with Peter earlier today. Take a look and a listen. Peter Roff, thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Cam. Always happy to be with you.
It has been too long. You got a great piece at Newsweek right now talking about technology. You say not more gun control is how we're really going to stop these types of active assailant attacks going forward.
Well, I don't know that it's going to stop them. I do think it will help reduce the carnage. Everybody now who talks about more gun control, red flag laws, they're actually missing the point. You took the guns away, people will use bombs. The guys in Boston at the marathon put bombs in pressure cookers. They have a problem in Britain now with mass knife attacks. The red flag laws don't mention mental health and vitiate due process for too many licensed, law-abiding gun owners. So we really need to be thinking about what what's going on here. People want to be safe. And so what do we do to maximize their safety? And I think that's where technology comes into play. And that's why I wrote the piece that's on the Newsweek website this week.
You actually spoke with somebody who's actually kind of making inroads in this area, right?
John South, who founded a company called Patrocinium, and he's created a technology where they use existing sensors to give what he calls a 4D picture of what's going on inside an event, that can send messages to law enforcement, can send messages to first responders, and can send messages to you and me on our cell phones if we're subscribers to the system. I think that's the kind of thing that we need to know, so that for example, your kids go to school every day, they take their phones. If there's an incident, be very useful to know where the shooter was and where the shooter was moving. We saw this, I believe, in the Florida shooting, where he positioned himself to try and catch kids as they were coming out of the school. It would have been very useful to know that's where he was, and to not go through those doors, to go through other doors. I can see the applications in office buildings, whether you want to get off a floor or shelter in place, in shopping malls. If they'd had this system, they tell me in Las Vegas, when the fella opened up on everybody from the hotel room window, they would have been able to find him a lot faster than they found him, and that would have, again, reduced the carnage. None of us can be completely safe. We take our lives in our hands every time we get in the bathtub or every time we get in a car. The question is, what do we do to minimize our risk without minimizing our ability to exercise our liberties?
Well, and honestly, that doesn't seem to be much of a concern, unfortunately, for a lot of politicians. They seem to be just fine with calling for all kinds of things that would limit our liberties, and yet at the same time, don't really seem like they would do much to actually try to stop these types of attacks that we're talking about.
Well, that's really the issue, that they're playing politics, and frankly, I fault people on both sides. There are some Second Amendment supporters out there who don't want to have a rational conversation about how we can use technology to improve community safety, because they don't want to have the conversation at all. They want to pretend like there isn't a problem. There is a problem. There are things, I think, that could be done through red flag laws that could reduce the potential population of people committing mass violence, but those laws have to be written in such a way that they don't vitiate due process and actually are targeted towards the people that we worry about, and not licensed gun owners. And then, of course, there's the anti-Second Amendment crowd who thinks the answer to every solution is to take everybody's guns away. None of that makes anybody safer, because, as I said, you take everybody's guns away, and Ted Kaczynski will use, as he did, the Unabomber used bombs. Yeah. The guys in Boston used bombs. Some of the terrorists that have been stopped were alleged to have wanted to poison water supplies. If you want to kill a lot of people, you can kill a lot of people. The question is, how do we make everybody safe without vitiating our liberties? And again, as I said in the piece, the year before the weekend that we went through the El Paso and Dayton shootings, there were more people shot and killed in Chicago than were shot and killed in El Paso and Dayton combined. Mm-hmm. It's just that the Chicago shootings happened 1, 2, 3 at a time, and not in a great mass of folks. And Chicago has some of the toughest gun control laws in the country.
Well, and I'm curious, this technology that you're talking about, would it have any sort of application in this street violence that you describe in Chicago, the violence that we see on a daily basis in Baltimore and St. Louis? does this apply to either preventing or helping law enforcement and passerby in those types of situations as well?
There are certainly, and I don't want to speak exclusively to patrocinium.
Sure.
Although I'm excited about it and its potentials. What we have to be doing collectively is looking to technology to find ways to make communities safer. Burglar alarms were a technology that were supposed to make our property safer, because if somebody who didn't belong in our home or in our business broke a window and came in, there'd be a bell that would go off. It would send a signal to the police station. The police would come. Our property would be, theoretically anyway, protected, because the noise and the knowledge that the police were coming would cause the thieves to leave. We have opportunities now. Everybody has a phone. Everybody has some kind of a device. And if you don't have a device, that too makes you suspicious. And I understand that there are technologies out there that can isolate you in a crowd if you walk in and you're technologically naked, that you're not sending off any signal, because that's often indicative that there's something going on. If you don't have a phone, if you don't have something that's sending off a signal, there's a reason that they ought to pay attention to you.
See, and I actually left the house without my phone this morning, so now I'm under additional scrutiny.
But you walk into a football stadium or a movie theater, and you're not emitting any signals. Why is that? Because you don't want to be tracked. If you don't want to be tracked, why don't you want to be tracked? Are you thinking about doing something that you might not want to do? Do you have something on your person that might be dangerous and you're trying to remain anonymous? These are all legitimate questions that ought to be asked, and there are answers that I think technology can get us to, again, that don't compromise our liberty, don't compromise our privacy, but leave us safer.
Talking again with Peter Roff, Newsweek contributing editor. And, it's interesting, Peter, because I think that you're right about this. But I also do see that other side, that suspicion of, okay, look, are we getting into pre-crime now? Are we really going to start, looking at people's lack of a phone and decide, okay, we're going to profile them based on that? We see things like, Facebook employees, listening in on chats, the idea of the Internet of Things not being quite as secure as we thought that it was. I think that is a barrier for a lot of folks when they say, okay, listen, we can use technology to try to make us safer. I think a lot of people think about the abuse that we've seen from that technology as well, and I think they're a little fearful of that.
Absolutely, but there's potential for abuse in everything.
Sure.
There are just picking an example at random. There are life-saving drugs out there that people that you and I both care about are benefiting from. Do they have the potential to be abused? Absolutely. Are there controls on them to minimize the abuse? Yes. Should there be? Yes. We're not talking necessarily about, everybody has to get down to City Hall and be photographed and fingerprinted and everything goes into a database, and then, you commit a crime, you run a red light camera, you show up naked in a technologically naked in a football stadium, you send a threatening letter to somebody and bing, bam, boom, they got you, and the presumption of innocence goes out the window. But there are things that we can do with sensors and phones and information sharing that I don't think impact our liberties adversely, either in terms of our privacy or our Second Amendment rights or our First Amendment rights to freely associate with people, or they have any kind of requirements that we just turn all our information over to the government either. But these things can be employed privately. I do think that we need to have a bigger, better national conversation about data and who owns data. Is it the data collecting companies? Is it the data processing companies? Or should you and I have something to say about our data? I tend to think we should. I object to the fact that there are other people out there who are profiting from the sale of my data, and I'm not. I think it's mine. But we ought to have this conversation, but we ought to have it in the context also of increasing our safety.
Talking again with our friend Peter Roff. Peter, thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the program today. It was so good talking with you, and I hope we get a chance to continue this conversation here soon.
Absolutely. I love coming on your show.
Well, we always love talking with you. Thanks again. Peter Roff joins contributing editor at Newsweek here on Barry & Arms Cam & Company. Yeah, we're definitely going to have to continue that conversation because I'm just a little creeped out by the whole Big Brother technology thing, the Chinese social credit, the CCTV cameras, the thought that, you could get flagged for not having your phone. Some of us are just forgetful, All right, let's get to today's armed citizen story. Let's get to our good deed of the day. And of course, our failure of the criminal justice system. In fact, let's begin there from the great state of Oklahoma, where a Texas man has been sent back to prison after violating his probation. Yeah, this didn't turn out well. 23-year-old Keenan Major of Austin, Texas, pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter in September of 2016 in Muskogee County, Oklahoma. Following the fatal shooting back in 2014 of D'Angelo Cortez Grayson, who was 18, according to Muskogee Phoenix. Now, Keenan Major got a 10-year sentence in 2016 for that death. And then all but the first 4 years of that prison sentence was suspended. So he, in essence, got a 4-year prison sentence. But no, Keenan Major did not serve 4 years because, again, he was sentenced in 2016, right? It's only 2019 now. As it turns out, he went to prison in September of 2016. He was released after serving his quote-unquote 4-year prison sentence a little more than a year later, in December of 2017. So a 10-year sentence for manslaughter ends up being less than a year and a half behind bars. Now, Keenan Major is going back to prison after he violated his probation there in Muskogee County by committing a robbery in Texas. The probation revoked on Monday after Major assaulted and robbed a man in Travis County, Texas. This was a man that Muskogee County flew in to provide witness testimony during a revocation hearing. The man, identified in a Travis County affidavit as CW, said the robbery occurred in September of 2018. According to the Muskogee County Assistant District Attorney Nalani Ching, quote, his testimony was that he was met by Keenan Major through contact on Facebook Market and the Offer Up app. Keenan was pretending to want to buy a cell phone that the victim had for sale. Once they met in person, Keenan Major allegedly attempted to enter the vehicle from the passenger side door. They moved around to the driver's side door, holding the cell phone in question. Ching said the victim had his left leg between the door and the car with the door open. Keenan waited until the victim was looking at a text and then slammed the door on the victim's leg, took off with the now stolen phone, then hopped into a getaway vehicle and took off running. So the application to revoke Major's probation took place in November, almost a year ago, but it wasn't completed until an arrest of Keenan Major back on July 22nd on a petty larceny complaint. So Keenan Major, again, now going to be spending at least a little time behind bars, but good Lord, 10-year sentence for manslaughter. The actual sentence served, again, less than a year and a half behind bars. Tell me again that our criminal justice system is working just like it's supposed to. All right, our armed citizen story for you from Philadelphia, where a Metro PCS employee fatally shot a would-be robber who came into this store and almost immediately tried to rob the employee inside. Now, little did this robber know that the employee there was and is a concealed carry holder. According to Channel 6 in Philadelphia, the suspect died at the scene. Philadelphia Police Captain Scott Driscoll said a male entered the store with a firearm and attempted to rob the store, to which he discharged his firearm at the robbery suspect several times, striking him. Neighbors told CBS or ABC6 in Philadelphia that they heard shots from inside. One local activist, Jordan, says that it is unfortunate that somebody has died, but also says that people have to protect themselves. He said, quote, he's doing his job and standing his ground in whatever he had to do. But this is normal in Southwest. It's an everyday thing. Nothing new for us. Nothing new for that Sprint PCS store either. Police say that that was the third time recently that somebody has come into that store with the intent to rob the place. Now, our good deed of the day today could also be our, plea deal of the day as well, unfortunately. This gentleman, West Harris County, Texas, Pedro Reyna is his name. It was about 2:45 last Thursday morning. There's a deputy with Harris County Precinct 5 pulled over Pedro Reyna for driving with an expired registration tag. Reyna exited the vehicle, according to authorities, and then began tussling with the officer. He actually managed to escape while he was handcuffed and then went on to attack the deputy. There were two record drivers who actually saw what was going on, and they rushed over to help the officer restrain Reyna so that he could be successfully handcuffed. Constable Ted Heap says, I'm extremely grateful for the action of these record drivers who saw this attack and came to our deputy's aid despite the dangerous situation. Reyna has a lengthy criminal history, as it turns out. He was arrested and charged with possession of a controlled substance, as well as being a felon in possession of a firearm, as well as assault on a public servant. According to coveringkatie.com, the deputy suffered some scrapes in the altercation, but was not seriously injured. And we'll see if this time around, with these serious charges, if the criminal justice system takes Pedro Reyna a little bit more seriously. That has got to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Thank you again for being a part of the program. It is good to have you with us as always. Tomorrow on the program, I'm going to be talking with one of the guys from Open Source Defense. Kareem Shara is going to be with us. He's got a really interesting post on game theory, universal background checks, and potentially an idea that could lead to more background checks, does not lead to a gun registry. In fact, may give gun owners more privacy than what they have now. Does it sound too good to be true? Well, we'll get into that on tomorrow's Cam and Company. Thanks again for being a part of the program. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, on Spotify, on Stitcher. You can also find us on the townhall.com podcast page. Of course, if you want to get the video version each and every day, you can subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube. Again, appreciate you being a part of the program. We'll see you back here tomorrow with another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company.